Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Deep Dive, Emerald City Hockey Seattle Kraken podcast. RJ, we're into the Olympic break. Hope you're enjoying a small little breather here before the Olympic action really gets going for the tournament there, and then also just got a little bit of runway here to breathe before the NHL all comes back, and then we have the mad dash to the trade deadline.
I know it's going to be a busy schedule once it comes back. So I took the first day, whatever it was, the 5th, the first day the Kraken didn't play and just kind of did nothing hockey related. So that was nice. And then focused a little bit more on football yesterday. By the way, congratulations to the Seattle Seahawks.
Yep, definitely. Well-earned Super Bowl win. Just never a question, really.
Yeah. Hey, I was only 2 points off on my prediction. I had 31-13.
That's true. I just one of those where as much as I want to congratulate them for obviously being the best team in football this year as they ran through everything. Boy, you did make the Super Bowl boring by just crushing the Patriots. And again, I'm not super complaining. I hate the Patriots. Good on you. Crush them all day long. But the one thing that does make is by the third quarter it was like, oh man, this is getting tough to watch. it was that meme of, right, like, stop it, he's already dead.
Yeah, and yet without a touchdown for a long time, it felt like.
So. Yeah, no, but good stuff. And I have to imagine you a little excited too, just because a couple USC storylines coming together on that Seahawks team. I thought it was really nice when Sam Darnold and Leonard Williams came together there afterwards to celebrate that championship, because I remember being at SC game against UW, actually, where UW won. So there you go Dogs. But they were both there on the sideline. We watched them play. It was cool to see them then win together with the Seahawks.
Yeah, definitely. And like I remember seeing them when I was in school, and Sam Darnold was the quarterback my senior year when I was there. So that was really fun. Don't forget Uchenna Nwosu.
True.
Another USC Trojan who had a touchdown in that game.
Yes.
So make sure you can't forget him. But yeah, no, the Trojans doing well up in Seattle.
Yeah, no, just an incredible run that the Seahawks have. Great organization, just everything that they've been doing there. And, we'll see what next year brings. As you and I were just talking before this, third most cap space, I think you said, going into the offseason in the NFL.
It's top 5 for sure. Yeah, they've got a lot of options.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see what they do, because it's a well-run organization. They're going to utilize it well, and they're going to come back strong next year. So good stuff.
Yep. As we're going to be talking about a lot of cap space later in this podcast too, and will the Kraken utilize it well?
Yeah, as I was going to say, I mean, it makes for a nice segue over into the Kraken talk. I mean, vast majority of today's podcast, almost all of today's podcast, is going to be talking about the attempt to land the big fish that there was with them and trying to land Artemi Panarin, who of course has now been traded to the Los Angeles Kings. And so he'll be in division, but he will not be in Seattle. And we're going to talk all about that, because that was the biggest story for that last week of the season before the Olympic break, RJ, regarding the Seattle Kraken. I mean, nothing else really came close. So we're going to definitely dive into that. We'll talk about the upcoming free agent situation and what that might mean for the trade deadline as well, and what the Kraken are going to be up to during this Olympic break. So lots of stuff to talk about there. But of course, first, before we get to that, RJ, talk about the Kraken trying to land the big fish. We landed the big fish when we got the offices of Rico Tessendor to sponsor the Deep Dive. I don't know. I'm just saying, we did it. Kraken didn't get Panarin, but we got Rico.
That's true. And you know what? It's the Kraken. There were questions about, is it somewhere he wanted to play? Is Panarin really interested or not? Was this a way to get the offer higher from somewhere else? I mean, there's a lot of inside workings with that. But with Rico, I think there was no question. This is where he wanted to be.
Yep, definitely. He lets us know that every time we talk to him. Just such a pleasure working with him. So happy to have him on board. And while we hope none of you ever need his services, the odds say that at some point someone out there will be involved in an accident, whether on the road, at work, or anywhere in between. And when you are, we hope you call Rico at 425-778-9800 or visit his website, ricotessendor.com, to schedule a free consultation. He's won millions of dollars for his clients and helped thousands of people in the greater Seattle area. And as a fellow member of the ECH community, we know he'll help you too. All right, so on to Artemi Panarin. So he goes to the Los Angeles Kings. That is ultimately the deal that gets done between the New York Rangers and the Kings. Goes in exchange for Liam Greentree and a conditional third-round pick is what the Rangers get back. And I do think that it's worth starting this whole conversation with Panarin only wanted to go to Los Angeles, right? Like we're going to talk about the push that the Kraken made and the offer that they had on the table for him and everything like that. But I think that it is worth noting, especially coming off the read and everything. We were having fun with that. Seattle wasn't really in play, it seems like, but it also seems like nobody else was. Like, I don't think it was just a strictly, I don't want to go to Seattle, but I'm open to all of these other things. This was very much Panarin wanted Los Angeles. That was the only place he was willing to go. He signed for a lot less of an extension to go to Los Angeles versus not just what the Kraken were offering, but it sounds like other teams were offering. This was very much the player having a very specific destination in mind and leveraging that to get a trade to only that destination.
Exactly. And now, while it was reported that early on in the process, he did consider other teams, that was something he
Yeah.
thought about. It wasn't LA or bust from as soon as this was ever discussed. He looked around, considered his options, and by the time he made a decision on where he was willing to go, and by the way, this is based on the no move clause that he has. So he had a full no movement clause, so he could control his destination. For any trade the Rangers were going to make, Panarin had to sign off on it. So he could choose how many teams he would be willing to trade to. And at the end of the day, it was only one. It was only LA. And that's why you see the return being what it was, probably a little lighter, probably a lot lighter than it would have been if the Rangers had more leverage there. They had no leverage. The Kings knew they had no leverage. That's why you see the return there. And that's also why you see the extension at 2 years times 11 million, particularly that 2-year term, because it was rumored before the process, and I believe it, that Panarin ultimately was looking for 4 years or something in that range, but $50 million total. That's kind of what he was looking at. He ends up getting 22 million total, which is a lot less than he could have gotten, as we'll discuss, but also a lot less than what he was seeking. And so it really comes down to he wanted to go to LA. I think he even said afterward, it was odd to hear a player talking this way, but he said, you know, I think if Ken Hall and the Kings GM had known how much I wanted to go there, he would have only offered me 5 million. And he also said something to the effect of, yeah, if it hadn't been the Kings, if they didn't want me, I would have just gone back to Russia, which, I mean, that was interesting. But yeah, that really just highlights how much, at the end of the day, LA was where he was going to go.
Yeah. So I don't want, as we go into this conversation, I don't want the idea getting out there for everybody that, you know, Seattle was just so undesirable a situation that that's why, you know, this didn't happen for them. There was plenty of other teams involved that he also did not want to go to. And so I think for at least this instance, that's worth just having out there. And then all the discussion we'll have around this is assuming he had been open to going anywhere but Los Angeles and what the Kraken ultimately offered. We don't know trade specifics, like what would have specifically gone to the Rangers, RJ. We only really know about the contract that the Seattle Kraken were apparently willing to offer in terms of an extension for Artemi Panarin. We'll get to the contract in a second. Just on the trade itself front, I have to imagine if more teams were involved in this, if it was a true proper bidding war scenario, RJ, I think it's probably safe to say the trade return would have been built around Shane Wright.
I would have to think so, because then it would just be different dynamics for a trade. If Seattle was somewhere he's willing to go, I would have to imagine it's probably not just Seattle. I'm only going to Seattle. That's only
Right.
where I want to go.
Yeah.
There would be
Again,
other teams open.
proper bidding war situation where the 4 or 5 teams go in and try to make their pitch for him.
Then yes, and the Rangers would be looking not so much as far as where Panarin would want to go the most, but as far as what return they could get, that's the largest. And I think the Kraken with Shane, right, that's probably what would make the most sense.
Yeah. And I only bring this up because when we talk about this contract extension now that the Kraken were apparently willing to offer, it very much showcases how all in the Kraken are on trying to land that big fish, on trying to land a star player and bring them to the organization. And I think that their trade package would have also shown that, because I can't imagine they would offer the extension that they were reportedly willing to offer him and then not have the trade to back it up should that have, been necessary. And so that's the only reason I bring up that small section of it, is just to kind of get that out there. Now we can talk about that big contract that we're teasing. And that was, well, I'll let you give the details, but it was a very massive and substantial contract extension that apparently Seattle was willing to offer him.
Yeah, definitely. And you talk about, Panarin's ask of somewhere $50 million total. This would have exceeded that. This is an effort to go above that. It was reported at 4 years at north of $14 million per year. That's the reporting from Elliot Friedman. And we don't know how far north of it, but I don't think it really matters at that point, the fact that it's over 14 million, because you look around the NHL and you look at the cap hits for next season, that would have given Artemi Panarin the second largest cap hit in the NHL next year, behind only Kirill Kaprizov, who just signed that mega deal to be number one earlier this season. That's a lot of money. That is a huge contract. And at that point, you're talking just throwing, lots and lots of money at a player, to the point where you're not even really concerned with exactly how much it is. Just so much that it's going to outbid any other team.
Right, exactly. And so couple things just on the straight money front before we get even more into specifics around all this. Showcasing a willingness from not just ownership to spend, something that has always been there. And I know we've gotten comments over the years on social media. Other people in the Kraken media scene have gotten these comments over the years on social media, particularly during the down years, that this is potentially like a Mariners situation and ownership is the problem and all of that kind of stuff. The idea that this organization is unwilling to spend in the way that historically the Mariners have kind of been perceived, that's just not true. This ownership group has never not been willing to spend to the cap, to lay out the big money if it meant landing a big player. Just because it hasn't happened for them yet, this being another example of it not happening, does not mean that the ownership group is unwilling to do so. And so I just want to put that out there. This ownership group is willing to go out there and spend the big bucks to try to land the big fish. They understand how the game is played. This is not a Mariners situation. It's a different situation. But I think more notable for this specific thing, RJ, is that it signals that the front office was willing to spend this much money and have a cap hit that high wrapped up in a single player. And I think that that's a big tell under what this front office looks like now under Jason Botterill as general manager rather than Ron Francis. Because I don't know that if Ron was still general manager instead of just president of hockey ops, that maybe we would have seen that package.
No, I don't think so. Certainly not if he was operating things in the way that he would ideally want to. We know Ron Francis is pretty darn risk averse. He doesn't hand out a lot of money. And really, you look at his entire career as a GM, whether it be Carolina to the Kraken, until you get those Stevenson and Montour deals, he didn't really ever hand out big contracts to free agents or players acquired via trade or anything like that. The Stevenson and Montour deals kind of broke the mold for him. And then with Botterill, I think you're seeing another level of being willing to spend. That said, I think ownership, as you said, was always willing to shell out that kind of money for a contract if the right situation came along. I just don't think Francis would have ever been willing to do that. And you are seeing the difference there in Jason Botterill. And I think it does indicate the team's, I'll use the word desperation to bring in a star level player, or they're how aggressive they want to be in this, right? The fact that they are willing, they will, because look, I think with Panarin, 14 million, it's probably an overpay for the production he's going to bring. I think, look at what other teams that offer, but they're willing to overpay if it means bringing in the right player. And that's something that I think is a difference from at least the early Kraken years.
Yeah, I wouldn't use desperation. I would say seriousness to bring in and add a player of that caliber, because I think it's one of those things where, you talk about an overpay, right? And would it be an overpay? Yeah, it probably would be, especially the last like 2 years of that sort of extension, because then he's going to be north of 35 and all of that. But I think that when you're talking about the modern NHL landscape of how often players of that level become available, they just basically don't become available in free agency. So you have no opportunity to just straight bid on them in that sense and aggressively compete with just dollars. But they don't regularly become available via trade either. It seems like that's starting to become more of a thing, right? I mean, we went like 20 years between Thornton to Jack Eichel trade, but then just this year, right? Like we've had the Quinn Hughes trade, we've had now this Panarin trade. Like the idea that
Drunken
these
moving.
high level, yeah, exactly. So the idea that these trades can happen is starting to become more of a common thing. But I think that it's still one of those things where if you want a star level player and you have not drafted and developed one your own yet, you have to be willing to go above and beyond to land that player. That's just the world that we live in. And so I don't know that it always signals desperation so much as just seriousness to play ball in the current landscape. And that's kind of how I viewed this for the Kraken and potentially why any of this is coming out. And this was reported, you mentioned Elliot Friedman, but this kind of thing around this Panarin deal was reported by multiple different insiders that the Kraken were involved in this. And I think the fact that the Kraken are the only team that a specific number and what the potential cap hit with an extension was released from tells me that the Kraken must kind of want that out there, right? Because
Yeah, and that
nobody
was
else is getting that out there, but the Kraken number is out there. And I have to think that that's, again, another signal from this front office just to other players around the league of like, hey, look, we are serious about this.
Yeah, and that was my next question to you is, do you think the Kraken actually wanted this out there? Because yeah, I think they did. Also, Friedman, when he was looking and kind of following up for his report, he got a quote from Jason Botterill. Of course, he didn't talk about the specifics, any situation. You know, we don't discuss, you know, these conversations, as any GM will tell you. But he did get a quote from him when digging into this sort of thing. And I think most GMs, if they don't want something like that out there, if they're bothered that something like that got out, they're not going to go talk to you and give you a quote for your report. I don't think. I think Botterill really does want everyone to know that he is serious. And Friedman, following up in his written 32 thoughts, did say that offer turned eyes to the Northwest, right?
Mhm.
Players know, agents know that the Kraken are willing to go there for the right player in a way that maybe they hadn't in the past.
Right. And look, it makes sense. Obviously, we've talked forever about them needing a star level producer, somebody that can more reliably have that point production out there on the ice, somebody that you can depend on game in, game out to have production who can, basically contribute a goal plus per game and not just necessarily in scoring, because obviously nobody kind of scores at that rate these days, but through point production, right? And Artemi Panarin has been a point per game player for a very long time now. He continues to be this year, right? I think
Just
he
about.
just about, and that's in less than ideal circumstances on a very poor New York Rangers team with trade speculation swirling around him. Still 57 points in 52 games, sitting on 19 goals. It's pretty impressive production. And so them looking to add a player like him, I think makes a lot of sense. The cap hit wise, RJ, we look at what the cap situation would be for the Kraken next year, and could they offer this much money? Because I think that was one of the top things that we got back when we first posted this news on social media and reported on it. Lots of people being like, that's way too much term for a player this age. That's way too much money. And I think we can get to the term stuff in a second, but on the money front, the Kraken, the way that they're set up, and I think partly why they would be willing to do this is because certainly at least over the next couple of years, they absolutely could have a contract like that on the books because they don't have any other real true big money deals.
No, they really don't. They've got a ton of cap space to work with. And this is something I've been preaching on the last few Armchair GM streams, where you look at the way the Kraken contract set up for next season, assuming you just kind of have everything moving forward to next year, all the UFAs you don't re-sign at this point. You have the option to bring them back, but with just the players you have under contract, you're looking at maybe $35 million in cap space to fill 4 roster spots. That's a lot of money for very few spots. And even then, if you have more younger players coming up too, that's another option to fill in cheaper deals. You can give out not one, but probably 2 Panarin contracts comfortably if that's what you really want to do. Cap space is not going to be an issue for the Kraken at all in the short term. And so as a result, you can go after basically the best players you can get. You can afford to overpay. And this is where I was getting at too when I was saying, yeah, it's an overpay for Panarin. You need to understand from a Kraken perspective that for right now, an overpay for the right player isn't necessarily a bad thing. it could be a very good thing. And having an extra $1-2 million cap hit on a contract like this compared to what market is, that's money that probably is not being spent elsewhere. Like there's probably not a good way to really spend that money. Or the alternative, if you prefer this, which I certainly do not, is you bring back Eberle, Schwartz. So just bring back everybody, have a bunch of middle sixers, and just have them cost more individually, and you just continue to have that logjam of middle sixers. But I think the team has realized, I think we've all realized, that's not really a sustainable way to create success. And so that's why the Kraken are trying to get a different type of team build here by bringing in a star player. For the right guy, an overpay isn't a problem.
Yeah, I totally agree. Given how this situation is set up, and yeah, you talk about having so few roster spots, so much money. You talk about the young guys coming up. You get Yanni Newman, maybe Oscar Fisker Molgaard on this team. That's 2 of the 4 or 5 roster spots taken up on ELCs that cost less than $1 million towards the cap. Right? Like it just pushes how much then you have to spend on average for those remaining roster spots even higher. And again, this isn't to say that now that that Panarin contract doesn't exist on the Kraken books, they should just go out and sign the top 2 free agent players to ridiculous numbers, obviously. But it just goes to show the situation that with the rising cap that the Kraken are in. And it's also the situation because they have their young pieces and some of their long-term staples locked up under contract for a while, right? The Matty Beniers extension, where he's making, 7.15 seemingly forever, means that you have your 1C locked down at what is today now considered a very reasonable cap hit to have on your books, because you're talking about a world where the salary cap has risen so much. It's just not going to be that huge deal, and it's going to rise again in 27, 28. So it's rising each of the next 2 years, and that Matty contract is going to stay fixed. The Chandler Stevens contract stays fixed. Montour's contract stays fixed, very similar to Matty's money, right? Joey Decord is fixed at $5 million. It means that you can kind of project out and see like, okay, they're going to have this space over the next 3-4 years, because they also, RJ, when you look at the young players, they don't have anybody else that they need to be saving that money for on the young side. Because that's usually the other aspect that teams have to consider is, well, we have this really good young player and his ELC is going to be running up and we're going to have to extend him. And that's going to be a huge pay bump from, $975,000 or whatever to potentially $9 million or whatever it's going to be. The Kraken don't really have that. Right. The next young player that they have that's going to be coming up would be Shane Wright, who would need an extension for 27, 28. That's the first year he's not under contract. But based on his production and usage, I think a bridge deal is pretty reasonable to expect based on now. Things can obviously change over the next 18 months before that contract would need to be there. But based on now, you're not assuming a massive jump up in pay for Shane Wright. Nothing like a mega contract. And then after that, it would be Berkeley Catton. But you're talking about him being under contract for 2 more years after this as part of his ELC. So there's nobody on the horizon that the Kraken really need to be saving money for, have some dollars stashed away to ensure that they keep them. I guess the one guy that you could say that about is Vince Dunn, who only has next year left under contract. But again, given the cap situation the Kraken have right now, they can go out and bring in somebody on a big deal and then still just make Vince Dunn the second big deal contract that they have if they wanted to.
Right. No, they absolutely have the money to do both of those things. And so that's why with this contract of 4 times north of 14, I really don't have any problem with it. In fact, I think that's exactly what the Kraken should be doing for the right player. Now, I've couched this whole time with for the right player. Because I mean, in the past, I've talked about, like, over the last couple years, I've talked about how the Kraken, hey, trade for Elias Pettersson. I'm not worried about 11.6 for a player like that. Go for it. I've talked about throwing money at lots of different guys if they make it to free agency. Most of them haven't, but if they did, I'd say throw a bunch of money at Marner if he would be willing to come to Seattle. All that. I still want to circle back to Panarin though and ask, is that the right player to be throwing the money at? Because when we saw a lot of reaction from Kraken fans, and I think we should acknowledge this, like, we're 24 minutes and we should probably acknowledge this. Most of the comments that I saw were to the effect of, wow, good thing they didn't get him. Good thing Panarin didn't want to accept that offer. This would not have been good for Seattle. And for various reasons. And
Yeah.
I think, we have to point out, of course, with the settlement and everything, like that's a very legitimate reason a fan would not want a player to come to Seattle, like,
Right.
hockey aside. And so we're talking about the hockey side of it, but there is a non-hockey side, and I totally get that.
Yeah. I was gonna bring that up later, an SA
Okay.
settlement that involved a Rangers employee,
Yeah.
that him and MSG had to play out. Yeah, I was gonna get to that and how, look, we have to basically talk about the hockey side of it because that's our job. Like, if the Kraken had landed this player, that is certainly part of the story, and the fact that the organization would have brought in a player who has had that, and recently too. This isn't like long forgotten history. You're talking about the settlement being paid out, I believe, last year. And so that is that is definitely a talking point, but on the day-to-day front, right, we would have to then cover the fact that he is on the team and that he would be performing on the team, and then we'd have to go through that. But yes, I also wanted to bring
So we
that up.
can and we can get into more details on that later. I didn't want to like
Yeah,
necessarily bring the whole thing up now because if you had something for it, but I just wanted to mention that on the non-hockey side, on the hockey side, for why people didn't like it, it seemed like a lot of people, it was based around his age and the
mhm,
fact that he is 34. I mean, that is certainly worth mentioning, and that he is a player that, if aging curves are to be trusted, should probably be in decline. Although, superstars tend to age a little different. But I bet by the fourth year of that contract, he's not going to be the same player he is now. You're getting the age 34 to 38 seasons for him. Is that a concern? Does that worry you? Does that make him maybe not the right player to kind of throw this money at, especially with a 4-year term?
yeah, it's one where I very much understand the concern around it, right? But I do think that he is close enough to that true superstar level that I'm not as worried about it as I would be for somebody else, right? Like, if this is more of the kinds of guys that make it to free agency and become UFAs, and certainly guys that become UFAs at the age of 34, yeah, I'm not being like rush out and sign that guy to a 4-year contract. But when I look at Panarin, the fact that he's still better than a point per game producer now, I think about the fact that last year he had 37 goals. The year before that, 49 goals, 120 points when things were good. Like, that's before the situation around him became toxic. Again, some of that due to his own actions, and that's his responsibility not to do those things. But I think about Sidney Crosby, Alex Ovechkin, Evgeny Malkin, some of the other older players around the league. And while I think he's not quite at their level, he's close, and he's closer than the vast majority of players in the National Hockey League are. And I think about what his production could look like at what their, age 38 years look like. And I can't help but to think that the floor for Panarin would still be a 20 to 25 goal scorer and 60 points, probably, right? And that's, you're talking about a decline in production from his, age 32 season to his age 38 season being literally cut in half, right? Like, just half of his age 32 season production. And guess what? That would still be, right as of now, one of the most productive seasons a Seattle Kraken player has ever had, right? And I'm projecting like a pretty aggressive fall off for him there throughout his 30s. I, that still feels like it's kind of a worth it deal if it meant that you had the couple years before that where the production is better and you get the message sent that, hey, we were serious and we were able to land a big fish, and this was maybe able to push us into that more perennial playoff team conversation and have them be in that competitive window, because then that contract for Panarin falls off, but you're now a more established team in the minds of upcoming free agents and guys who are going to be looking to be traded out of situations and all of that.
Yeah, see, this is where I'm conflicted on it, because I think you look at where that leaves the Kraken, and look, I think if it does push you into where you are a perennial playoff team, where in all 4 of those years that you have him, you are making the playoffs, then it's worth it. I'm still not convinced that this is a playoff team with Artemi Panarin next year, because we have to remember everything is going right this year. This is year 2 all over again. And look, I don't want to be that guy, but if you're projecting out into the future and playing armchair GM, you kind of have to be that guy. No, I think adding talent is big, but the problem is, okay, Well, also, I guess that gives you the question: are you trying to make the playoffs every year, or roughly every year, or are you trying to win a Stanley Cup? Because I think it gets you closer to being a perennial playoff team. It gets you much further from winning a Stanley Cup.
I think when you're talking about trading or UFAs or free agency, when you're talking
Yeah.
about acquiring guys there, I don't know that you can ever talk about those moves specifically being Stanley Cup moves. I think the only way you become a legitimate Stanley Cup contender is through drafting and developing. And so I think the core that you draft and develop decides whether or not you're a Stanley Cup contender. And any sort of deals like this determines whether or not around that you're a playoff team or not. Right. And certainly, like, these are the deals that you do to add yourself over the top if you're already kind of pushing against that contender window. But I think ultimately, when you're looking at front offices and trying to judge them and trying to see where teams are, it ultimately comes down to drafting and developing. And, as of right now, with Berkeley Catton only being 19, 20 years old, Shane Wright still being young, Matty Beniers kind of becoming what he is becoming, right? The Kraken aren't really in that contention window, right? The core that they have so far isn't there. Obviously, Berkeley Catton's going to get better. Shane Wright has some time left, although the clock is ticking. But
that's what I'm talking about.
Yes.
Yeah.
So no. Do I think Panarin turns them into cup contenders? If that's your question, no, he doesn't. But I do think that he pushes them to the playoff window. If you have like him and Jared McCann together on that team, spreading out some offense, I feel like that is enough to be at least a wild card team in the Western Conference for the next 3 or 4 years.
Potentially, like, depending on what else you add around. I think that certainly is the path there. But what I'm talking about is, like you say, it's about the players you draft and develop and having those turn into proper stars or not. And I think if you make the Panarin trade and you have, 34 to 37-year-old, right, who you're working around and trying to sneak into the playoffs every year, we've seen it in the past. That means this team does not prioritize developing the young players that they've drafted. Like, that's the thing. You're picking that path rather than the more sustainable path of trying to actually draft and develop star players.
Devil's advocate being, if you have fewer guys, but that are at the top of the lineup, right? Like, part of the reason the Kraken have had such a hard time developing players and continue to, as we see like Yanni Newman scoring at like a ridiculous clip down in CV instead of being on the Kraken roster, is because of the amount of middle six guys that they've had. And that is because certainly under Ron Francis, the idea was that you don't spend big money on any one player, but you spread that money around over multiple contracts. I think if you do build your team around the concept of just having a few big money players, it does open up more spots so that you can develop players. And it also means that you have a player of the caliber of Artemi Panarin to play with your young developing players. Like, imagine what having a Panarin would do if all of a sudden he's on the wing of Shane Wright, or he's playing with Berkeley Catton, or he's playing with Matty Beniers, and what that does to them being able to develop into better players because they have somebody like that there, somebody who's going to draw defensive attention, make their lives a lot easier in the offensive zone, somebody who's going to boost their numbers, which makes you feel good. It builds your confidence. You start playing better because of it, right? And somebody who can just kind of think on their level. We've talked about this with Berkeley Catton. There's a lot of times Berkeley Catton's going out there and trying things, and it doesn't always look like the players on the third line that he's with are really kind of thinking in the same ways that he's thinking. But if you have a guy like Artemi Panarin around and Berkeley Catton's his center, they're going to be able to think at that kind of next level, higher level, and they are going to be able to produce things. So I think I get what you're saying. On the flip side, I think it can go the other way sometimes, just because you have those good players to help your young guys develop. And by having big money contracts, it means more roster spots inevitably become available because all your resources are tied up in just one or two key guys.
Yeah, and all that is a very good case to land the big fish, which again, I'm very much in favor of. I want it to be somebody who's somewhat in the age range for what the rest of your core is, which is why, like, for Jordan Kyrou, which is again not the level of Panarin, I get that, but I'm fine with it. Like, I think he's just a good buy low. Jason Robertson, 26, fantastic.
Sure,
Pedersen, like any of these guys who are, if you're under 30, totally fine with it. We'll sign off on it. The 34 actually does give me some pause, just based on the potential decline and also just the end of the time frame. Like, he's not going to be a useful player 4 years from now, when the guys you have drafted and developed to be your core will probably be at or near the height of their abilities. Like, he's gonna be gone.
Yeah, he would be a power play merchant. like that is very much what he would be. He'd be a pretty good power play merchant, dishing the puck from the side. But I totally agree with you on that. And I just think it's one of those where, and again, maybe I always come at this from like too pragmatic an approach. In an ideal world, is it a younger player? Absolutely. But you can only work with the market that exists in front of you. And Dallas hasn't actually really seemingly made too many moves to make Jason Robertson
No, I got that.
available,
We
right?
don't know that he's going to be
We don't
available.
know
Yeah,
that
yeah.
he ever even becomes available. And so I think it is one of those where the Kraken were operating with this player actually being on the market and potentially Kyra being on the market. Like, we don't totally know the situation there. It seems like the Blues are like at least listening, and I'm sure the Kraken have made a call, but they're operating with, look, Panarin is available now. That is a known quantity. We can at least get our foot in the door there and try to kick stuff around. But this then brings up my next point, though, about the idea of them wanting to get the extension and the number that they were talking about with him out there, which is just that getting it out there is obviously something that you want to signal to the rest of the league and to the players around the league that you're serious and everything like that. And we discussed that aspect of it. Do you think, though, that they made that offer after they knew that LA was going to kind of be the likely destination? Because I've seen this suggested, and I think like the timelines probably don't really work this way. But the idea of once they had a good idea that he was not going to be interested in Seattle, that they then make an insane offer just so that then they can have that leak and get out there and just look like they were being really serious about something, right? It's one of those, like, you throw it at him just as like a last ditch Hail Mary kind of thing, knowing that it's realistically not going to happen. But then you can honestly say that that happened. And then you can go to Elliot Friedman, and Elliot Friedman can report that that offer was on the table at some point. Or, is that pushing it too far? I think it might
I think
be a
that is
little too
pushing it
far.
too far.
Yeah.
Like, look, I do believe that the team wanted it out there, and that
Yeah.
that's the kind of thing that they were trying to get out there. That said, I do think that offer was probably in good faith with the hope that he would come to Seattle. I've seen nothing that would convince me otherwise. It is a fair question to ask, just because, look, I think that is a big part of what they're trying to accomplish here, is get everybody thinking about, okay, Seattle's going to do this, and so the next player that comes along, whether it's Robertson, or I mean Kyver's under contract long term, but anybody, right, knows, hey, Seattle's going to potentially pay me here. Let's think about it. Yeah, I think that was probably with the intention, hopefully, to get Panarin, rather than just putting that out there. Now, I mean, like, do you think? Because I'm wondering how early in the process would they have really known that Seattle wasn't a realistic option? Because really, also, you could say too that while you'd put that out there with the hope of getting him from the very start, you probably would know that Seattle was not a realistic option for Panarin, just given that he's tended to like to go to bigger cities. He's tended to, kind of have certain destinations in mind. He's only ever signed contracts in Chicago, New York, and LA. And I'm sorry, Seattle, but Seattle isn't, among cities like mega cities like that. You probably knew that already. And I think that should also like get to the question too, where I know we talked about it earlier in the podcast, but like, is it concerning that Panarin turned down that kind of money in Seattle? And I know you probably say, well, no, because he always wanted to go to LA. But I was also asked the question too, like, what can the Kraken do to become more of a destination, aside from throwing these gigantic money figures out there? Because of course,
That helps.
dollars speak. It certainly helps, right? Money speaks pretty loudly. But like, what else can the Kraken do to become a destination? Because at the end of the day, they don't get Panarin. But if they want to bring in one of these big fish, it's got to be in a situation where that player is going to want to come to Seattle. Too many good players have trade protection, or you have an extension to work out. Like, the player is going to have to want to come to Seattle.
Yeah, I think traditionally there's two surefire ways of getting players to want to come to your team consistently, right? And that's not even counting location, right? I'm not even counting location, because sometimes location does just matter, and that's the only thing that matters for a player. But I think the Panarin situation is unique in that he kind of ignored both things that I'm going to mention that are the traditional aspects. And those traditional aspects is either already having a star player, or at least a promising young player that other people want to play with, right? Sometimes just having a player of a high caliber, guys just want to play with them, right? There's just something about that. And then this tends to go in hand with having a star caliber level player, which is just guys want to go to a place where they feel like they can win. It is miserable inside of a locker room on a team that's not winning, on a team that's not going to make the playoffs, but you still have 2.5 months left, right? The idea of winning, obviously, they all want to win Stanley Cups and all of that, but just your day to day life experience when you're part of a winning team versus a losing team is so great for your mental health that I think they just genuinely want to be around winning teams, and winning sells. And I think that traditionally that has been the number one thing that has moved players around this league, that has gotten them to waive trade protection to go to a destination, or gotten them to sign with a team and take less money in an instance to do so, or to not be worried about tax implications and all that stuff that everybody brings up now, right? And so I think that for the Kraken, the number one thing that they have to do is show that they can be a consistent winning team. Making the playoffs this year would be great. I think they'd have to do it another year back to back in order to kind of shed the idea that this is a team that picks in the top 10, and that is a team that ran through some coaches, right? Like, guys pay attention to that around the league. They see that. They understand what that means and what it means for the players there. And I'm sure the Kraken players talk about it too, right? With their friends that are on other teams. That's just what happens. You have to shed that reputation that you have right now as being an organization that struggles to win, that has run through coaches and all of that kind of stuff, in order to then be more of a destination. But winning traditionally cures all, and it makes your reputation the positive reputation. What's weird about the Panarin situation is we know that there were other teams that are more successful than the Kraken, and certainly more successful than the LA Kings, involved in conversations, and he still did not care. He did not want to go to Carolina. Sounds like he didn't want to just be a rental in Dallas, right? Sounds like they couldn't figure something out in Florida, right? Like, there were teams that are more substantial and legitimate contenders than the Kings are, that have star players that he could play with, unlike the Kings, kind of, right? Like, I guess Kempe, pseudo star player a little bit. I don't know, right? They certainly have aging stars, but Kopitar is going to be gone after this year. And so he seems to have ignored those aspects that traditionally we see players value above all else, just for the location, whether it's the weather, the size of the city, the level of different communities around, whatever. LA just had a stranglehold on him, and that was it. But I think traditionally, for any fans wondering about this, it's just winning, and it's winning consistently. And players just want to be part of teams that do that.
Yeah, and I think for Panarin, it was location. It was simply he wanted to live in the city of Los Angeles, or also go to wherever he's going to be. He wanted to live in the Los Angeles area. That's it. And that's why I think in this particular instance, the Kraken shouldn't be concerned about that, because the Kraken were not able to offer living in Los Angeles. No other team was. And so you shouldn't be concerned there. And yeah, I'm with you generally. It's about winning, building a consistent winner. I think consistent is important, because look, the Kraken they're in a playoff spot right now. I think they're probably going to make the playoffs, but I think the perception around the league still is that it's probably a bit of a fluke, just given the weak division and all the stuff that we've talked about. You have to do it again. Certainly after year 2 for the Kraken, where they were able to make the playoffs. They were a game from the conference finals, and everyone saw how not real that was. I think you're going to have to do a little bit more to convince everybody that this isn't just a team of middle six guys on a PDO bender. Like, you're going to have to do a little bit more than that. And players will go anywhere, by the way, to win for a legitimate chance. If they feel like to win a Stanley Cup, Edmonton has no problem attracting guys. They've got stars you can play with. They've got, legit shot at a cup. That's not a problem. I think location wise, because if you look at Seattle specifically, there are some other major things that do make Seattle maybe a less desirable destination. It's not the kind of thing we've talked about a ton in the past, but I think it is relevant here as we look at a player who chose entirely based on a city's location. I think the general perception from Seattle, maybe, excuse me, among some of these players, the downsides are high cost of living, bad weather during the hockey season, and like lack of stuff to do, like nightlife. It can't really compete with LA in that respect. Yeah. And so those are the downsides. And I'm sorry, but the Kraken management can't really do anything about any of those. Those are just something that the Kraken are, something just that they're going to have to deal with.
Yeah. And it's, that stuff has popped up for other teams in free agency or trade discussions
far before. From the only team that has those issues with their city.
Yeah. Yeah. And, usually it just finding the right character fit, right? Because there's plenty of like outdoor activities in Seattle and stuff, and so you just got to find Canadian lake boy, like Jake O'Brien, who they drafted, right?
Yeah.
Who's just going to want to be fishing in his downtime, and that's Seattle is a great destination for that, and there's going to be lots of good things there. So sometimes it's just about finding that right player fit. The one thing though that we have heard from visiting reporters and things like that the reputation with Seattle is the high cost of living. That does seem to be a reputation that's out there because of the layout of the city and everything, if you want to be near the team facilities, but also have a certain level of privacy, certain level of accommodation that you're accustomed to as a professional athlete who's making millions of dollars every year, a significant amount of your check has to go to that. Right? It is not easy to just do that. And especially if you're not going to be a superstar that is going to be making north of $14 million, but you're talking about the players that are maybe in the $3 to $4 million range, the idea of maybe having to drop like $2 million on a house that
keep in mind your actual take home is like half of that $3 to $4 million range.
Yeah, because even though you're not paying state income tax, one, you're paying state income taxes or provincial taxes wherever those road games are being played, so you're not getting all the money there, and you're still in the 37% bracket of federal taxes. So a lot of that money is going away before you ever see it. The idea that maybe then for your housing accommodations, or at least what you're used to, what your idea of what you want is, all of a sudden is like a $2 million house, and your take home for the year is maybe 1.5 to 2 million. You dropping a whole year's salary just to buy that house, right? Like
whereas in other markets you don't have to.
Exactly. That same house or the same idea of that location near the practice facilities, whatever, might be substantially less just because the layouts of those places. Other cities tend to be more sprawling. There's the ability to find houses that have more privacy but are still closer to those places than maybe in Seattle, where things are built up a little denser. So that has been something that we've heard rumored as being word out of Seattle, is just that the cost of living, specifically with regards to housing, can sometimes be an issue. So
yeah,
just
and we don't need to go into like detail on it too, but one of the things that again we've heard from people as far as just perception around the league is like the no state income tax. That's a big positive. That might not last for much longer, and so then we'll see. I think that is something that could cause the Kraken some more trouble attracting people.
Yeah, it's a bigger issue for NHL players than it would be for necessarily other sports. So because the overall dollar figures you're talking about are less, so it makes a more substantial impact on them. But yeah, so that there is that component of it. But again, I think that it was not an issue bringing in a player like Brandon Montour, right? Because the location had plenty of things that he was interested in, and so it's just one of those that you kind of have to find that player fit when you're talking about these things. But that's an issue that Carolina is having right now, and nobody's been more consistently successful really than them, other than maybe like the Florida Panthers and Tampa Bay Lightning. And they're a state with low state income tax because they just have a flat income tax, and they have plenty of success. They have a coach everybody loves. They have star players that you could play with, and people just don't want to go there because they just don't want to live in Carolina, right? And I think Seattle probably has a better reputation than Carolina as far as like a place to live and things to do and stuff like that. So again, it's not a unique to Seattle thing. This is just something we're bringing up because it's not quite an off-season podcast, but it's certainly like a relevant time to bring it up in light of the Panarin news, and then also because we are during the Olympic break, and this kind of gives us the opportunity to talk about stuff that we hear that we don't normally, it doesn't normally make sense to discuss.
Yeah, this is a very different kind of topic and news cycle for the Kraken than we're used to getting. I mean, it is still also weird that with the Panarin sweepstakes and all of this, I was not expecting to talk about it on the Deep Dive podcast, except maybe a fleeting mention of like, how good does this make LA or whatever. I wasn't expecting the Kraken to be probably the second biggest part of this story behind the actual trade itself.
Right. No, it's really interesting. It's fun for us, right, that they were involved in something like this.
And I think they're going to continue to be involved. And like whenever there's a big fish now, I think we have to wonder, okay, what's the Kraken's role in this?
Yeah, no, it's true. One last thing just on the location thing, and I did think about this with Panarin, and I actually talked about it with my mom while I was here, because I'm back down south right now. I'm in LA actually, and
you.
Yeah, and I think we saw this with Mikko Rantanen as well when he was moving around, and the idea that he kind of wanted to be in a large, like really super large metropolitan area, because obviously Seattle is large, but it's not on the same level of Los Angeles or New York or something. And that's specifically with the foreign-born players, the non-North American players. Being in a place like this, there's going to be a community for you of people also from where you're from, right? You're going Artemi Panarin. There's a large Russian community in Los Angeles because there is a lot of people. There is, RJ. It's I can tell you what it is.
There is. It's just that, like, I was looking at the other day, like 2 days ago, a map of like Russian language speakers by state in the
Yeah.
United States,
Oh,
and
is
Washington
Washington
actually
high?
had like one of the highest. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. But I think like when you're finished, when you're
Your general
Swedish,
point
when you're
stands,
whatever, yeah, when you are from a different place, going to the largest metropolitan areas is going to give you the largest amount of people also from where you were from, that you're going to be able to find restaurants that make the food that you're used to, that when you're homesick, you're going to be able to go to. You're going to be able to find people speaking your language that you're going to be able to connect with and have social life with and everything like that. And I do think that sometimes when we hear of particularly the European players want to go to the big markets the way that Rantanen wanted to be in a big market, or we hear about their spouses wanting to be in a big market, because sometimes it could be a lot more important for the spouse than it is for the player, because the player is so busy during the season, they're traveling and they're with the team all the time. It can be a big deal for the spouse and for the family, right? You want to raise your kids around some level of the culture that you were raised in and that you're from. You want, if you're a spouse of a player, to be able to have some normalcy around you because you've moved halfway across the world and everything. And so I think that does become one of the things that also certain players value in these situations, and why sometimes these high level guys only want to go to one of the super mega markets compared to even a big place like Seattle, where it is New York, LA, Chicago as like, okay, these are the three places where you're probably going to be able to find a little insert culture here kind of town, right? Like that's just the way it is.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, you could put yourself in that position if you had to go to some other country where you had only been there for a few years or whatever. I think the larger of a city you go to, the more it feels just kind of like any city around the world. Like,
Yeah.
having been to a number of large cities around the world, that's kind of the feeling, right? Versus you get out into, it's smaller cities and it can feel a bit more distinctive. So that makes sense. Also, Dylan, to your point, I realized the map was per capita. So like Washington has a higher percentage, but California has way more Russian speakers.
Yeah,
than
the
Washington.
actual number is going to be
Yes.
a lot higher. Yeah, I kind of assumed that's probably what it was. Yeah.
But Washington had like top 5 in the country. So
Okay. That's good to know. Good to know. But yeah, so just interesting things. Again, I don't know that how much of any of this stuff is relevant for Panarin, but it's just it
also,
feels relevant to the discussion.
with the Russian thing, the Kraken have never had a Russian player before. Do you think
Right.
that was interesting too, as far as their willingness to, like, that was one of the reasons I was surprised too, is just because the Kraken have not had a single Russian player ever play for the organization. They drafted like Vyazavoy, but no one knows where he is. Like that they
We know
were
where he
willing
is.
to-
We just don't know if anybody's talked to him in a while.
right. And so, I mean, I think he did win like goalie of the
Goalie
week
of
or
the
whatever in
year,
the KHL. Like, yeah. But anyway, like my point is the Kraken have shied away from Russians entirely in their whole franchise history, and that Panarin would have been the first. I also just thought that was interesting. Like that's another reason I just didn't expect him to be on the radar.
Yeah, no, it has kind of felt like, and I doubt that it has been a rule internally.
No, I
but
don't think it has. It's
It
just
did
happened to
feel
work out
like,
that way.
yes, that was just something of note. How many? I know the number had dipped a lot, the amount of Russians in the National Hockey League. For a while, it was pretty small, actually. I think it's been growing again, but I do wonder what that is. Just if there's even enough to average one per team these days, because I know for a
I think it's
while
like
it.
50.
Okay, yeah. But I remember back in the like mid 20 teens, remember there was like that big worry when the KHL was making their big push to pay guys and to try to keep the domestic talent and everything. And the number dropped to like the low 20s. And everybody was like, wow, are we gonna like just lose them entirely? So yeah. But yeah, that is an interesting thing. Again, I don't think the Kraken have been avoiding Russians for any sort of reason, but
No, I don't think so
it would
either.
have been
Right.
notable in that, yes, he would have been the first one.
So maybe that makes you feel a little less at home, in a way.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
certainly wouldn't have any Russian teammates.
Right. Yeah. So, and we know how important that is when like the Kraken have brought in like Capo Caco and they have other
How well the
Finns
Finns
there
get
and
along,
stuff.
yeah.
Yeah. And what that means for the inside the locker room and things. So, yeah, I think there's just lots of factors that go into these things that we don't always normally think about and that we certainly don't always normally talk about, but they very much matter to these players and it can dictate where they go and why they go there. And I think that the Panarin situation, because of how dead set he was on LA, makes for like a good opportunity to talk about them.
Yeah, definitely. And looking ahead, because the Kraken I think they're gonna continue trying to go big game hunting. Like that seems to be a theme. So we kind of put all these future moves, whether it's the deadline or the offseason, kind of through this lens because it's clear what they're trying to do.
Right. And so what do you think that they try to do with that? Because like you have the upcoming UFAs, right? You have Jordan Eberle, you've got Ellie Tolvanen, you've got Jaden Schwartz, you've got Jamie Alexiak. What do you think this means for them? Do you think it means anything for them? Do you think this changes the plan and kind of internally what they had in mind with those guys at all?
Well, it's an interesting question because I think by the start of next season, the Kraken are going to they will have acquired a scoring winger that's at least like a top 6 guy. I think they're going to do whatever they can to go and get the best player they feel they can get, whether that's Kyrou, Robertson, whoever's available. I think they're going to go after the best guy that they can possibly get, and money is of no object to them. So they're going to have that addition on the roster. I feel pretty confident by that. And so, well, okay, how many spots do you have for all of the middle 6 guys that you have, plus all of the prospects that you have? It makes it more complicated. And of course, this being the Olympic break right before the trade deadline, this is the time where you're going to be negotiating with Schwartz, with Eberle, with Tolvanen, maybe with Alexiak. You're going to be talking to all of those guys and trying to figure out, okay, what do they want in terms of an extension? Does this make sense for us now and then where we're headed? And I think it means they're not going to bring all of them back, but I wouldn't be surprised by that anyway. And I would have told you that beforehand because they're just not going to be the spots. But really, I think if they feel they can actually bring in like a big name guy, I think it makes it actually more likely that they bring back, like say one of Schwartz or Everly or somebody. Because if you are, I think one of the things the Panarin trade tells you is like kind of where the team's head is at as far as short-term versus long-term thinking. They are very focused on the short term right now.
Mm-hmm.
They want to make the playoffs this season. They want to make the playoffs next season. That is big. Like, and they care more about that than anything further down the road. And I think you look at like guys like Schwartz and Eberle, at least in the short term, they can certainly help you do it. Eberle's maybe more than anybody, the guy who's helping you do it this season. So I think they're actually probably more likely to bring those guys back. I wouldn't be shocked to see one of them extended before the trade deadline. Because look, you're not trading them away. The Kraken are second in the Pacific by points percentage. You're not moving any of those guys. They're too integral to what the team does right now. Like I know there's reports that if they can't get them signed, they might look to move them. I don't buy that at all. They're not moving those guys. Alexiak maybe, but the wingers no.
Yeah, that's the way I kind of feel about it too. Like we keep seeing that reported, and I'm like, it just doesn't line up with anything else the organization has said, or more importantly, done. And so that's why I don't put a lot of stock into that either. Outside of like, yes, Alexiak maybe makes sense because you have guys that can fill in that are already on the roster, and Mahura and Fleury. So something like that makes sense. I think looking out to next year, I'm with you. Get some sort of trade done. Again, you still have those Tampa first rounders that all along the team has been like, ideally we would move these for a player. And so you still have those. You still have some young assets you could move because you have a lot of prospects that are playing well right now. And so I'm with you that they probably bring somebody in. But yeah, you bring back Eberle on a short-term deal, probably makes sense to do so. Jaden Schwartz can be very valuable and play up or down the lineup, I think, which would make him a little easier to bring back. Like Jordan Eberle, kind of has to slot into your top 6 on the right side, right? Like he is taking up definitively one of those 2 spots. Jaden Schwartz can play on the left side on any of your 4 lines. And as we saw when he was briefly on the 4th line a couple weeks ago, he just feasts on that matchup all day long, right? He just gives you a fourth line that all of a sudden is a legitimate threat out there. So I think that there's enough versatility on the Jaden Schwartz front that, yeah, you go ahead and you can bring him back, and you don't necessarily have to worry about him taking a spot away from somebody, because you just kind of plug him in wherever the gap is, and you kind of go from there with him, assuming he's okay with that, right? If he definitively wants like a crack at a first line, let him go to free agency and get that. He's earned it. But I think if you're bringing him back, I think that's the kind of the idea there. It makes me question about Eli Tolvanen. I think Tolvanen then becomes expendable, because I think in an ideal world at some point you want to be turning over those lower 6 spots to young guys and getting them NHL experience and everything. And if Eli Tolvanen's there and taking up a premium spot on the power play and all of that kind of stuff, I wonder about that. And so I could see them still maybe looking at Tolvanen as being an expendable piece, and maybe even at the trade deadline. Like if a good offer was to come across for Eli Tolvanen, I think they would really consider it in a way that I don't know that they would for Schwartz or Eberle.
Well, here's the thing. Like if they were to make a Kyrou deal at the deadline,
yeah,
and then you've brought in a scorer, I think it would mean you've already brought in a scoring winger, or somebody that could fill a wing spot. Then maybe you look at moving Tolvanen to recoup some of those assets. That's the only way I could see them doing it.
Yeah. No, and that's very possible. So, yeah, in which case, otherwise it's an off-season type thing, and you make the deal in the off-season, and then you let him walk in free agency.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I think because they're not going to trade these guys away, like at the deadline, like it buys them more time. Like I don't even think the time is of the essence right now for an extension on a lot of these guys, because you're not trading them. Like the whole reason that you would normally, and with these reports, that you would normally see a team do this before the deadline and be like, okay, we need to figure out where you're at in terms of an extension, is if you're not going to make the playoffs. And so you have to decide, okay, am I keeping this guy, or do I need to move him for whatever assets I can get? But the Kraken are going to make the playoffs, and like they're going to make a run. They're not moving these guys. They're not moving off of these guys. They don't need to figure out, what they need to get in terms of assets. Like you could totally decide after the season's over, are we getting a deal done or not? Like, and usually the players aren't in a huge rush for that.
Right. And I could also very reasonably see them in this scenario this year, just being like, look, we're just focused on making the playoffs. I'm not talking about
and the contract stuff's a distraction. Like,
just not wanting to deal with it. So, I'm with you there on that. So I think realistically, we don't see too much action from the Kraken at the deadline, unless they are able to swing like a Kyrou deal or something like that.
Yeah, I think they'll be trying on stuff like that, but so often these are off-season deals. If it's not a rental, they're off-season deals.
Yeah, the only thing is if St. Louis comes to their senses over the Olympic break and is like, yeah, we might as well just go ahead and do this. We feel like this offer is good enough that we can do it now instead of having to wait for the off season. Do it slow.
Well, that's the thing. You're going to have to really impress them with an offer, because they have no incentive to get a deal done like right away. Doesn't matter to them. So I do wonder too, is like Bottrell going to be aggressive? Be like, okay, it's going to cost an extra, maybe I have to include another for Tampa first or something to get a deal done before the deadline. Is that worth it to me? Those are the kind of things I think you might be considering.
Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting, because you have 25-ish games, say, left of the regular season.
Also, you face St. Louis twice before the trade deadline, like right coming out of the break. Like, is it worth it to you to get Kyrou off of that roster and have him on your side? Yeah, although you're going to win those 2 games anyway, but
still. You should anyway. Yeah, it is an interesting situation for Jason Bottrell. I like we've been talking about all along, though, on this Panarin front. Like, I like the idea that he was willing to do this. Like, that is a huge signal that we've never gotten from this team, that they are serious about trying to get better players. They are willing to do what it takes in the modern NHL landscape to do so. And I think that can only be seen as a positive. You can maybe frame it negatively, right? Like, I understand your viewpoint on there, but for me, that's a big positive. If anything, just because then hopefully we stop getting all the messages about this team being like the Mariners and they're never going to do what it takes to get a good player. And because we've known that has been false. And this just kind of helps prove that.
Yeah, they're not the Mariners. They've never been the Mariners. And look, they need to be in these conversations, whether you like Panarin or not, or think that would have been the right addition or not. And I totally legitimate on both sides of that. Yeah. These are the conversations they need to be in.
Mhm.
And for the first time ever, really, now they are.
Yeah. And it'll be interesting to see how things change for that, right? Like it that so much of what we've talked about today, it's going to be interesting to see how much of that becomes actionable for them in the future, and everything. On the fan base front, just to kind of close out on this, it felt like it did not move the needle as much as I thought it would. Like I did genuinely think that this was going to be something where people were going to be like, "Wow, the Kraken are serious about things." But I think that yes, the SA misconduct allegations and settlement and everything, so more than allegations probably, uh, mattered a lot to the fan base, and I think that the age mattered a lot to the fan base, and I think that, if anything, also the Kraken, they have that information now. Right? Like obviously we have that information, but the Kraken also have that information. It'll be interesting to see if that changes the calculus the next time a player is available that maybe has a situation like Panarin did with the settlement and the situation there, or the next time a star but older player is out there and available. It'll be interesting.
Yeah, because I mean, whether or not it changes what they do, like the front office does hear these things, they look at the reaction from the
Mhm.
fan base and whatnot. And so I do wonder about that. I mean, yeah, we didn't even get into like, the stuff with the settlement and all that. That's where I would use the word desperation rather than I forget which word you used. It wasn't aggressiveness, but seriousness, you
Seriousness,
know,
yeah.
to get a star player. Like there's certain things that I think that the organization maybe would have, had stopped them in the past, whereas now like they feel like they need a star, they're willing to
Yeah.
shell out that money. So and they want to be in those conversations and let it be known. Certain things that, maybe I think would have bothered them before that don't now. But yeah, I think I don't know. I just think the next guy that comes along, this probably won't be 34, maybe, but
Yeah.
but probably won't be. But it is interesting to see kind of how they handle that going forward, and like because it's got to be. I still think at the end of the day, it does have to be the right guy,
It
like
does.
and somebody of that caliber. And clearly, the Kraken think Panarin is of that caliber skill wise, and I agree with them.
I do
Like
too.
on a talent thing. But the danger is thinking that somebody, and again, I'm not saying they're not. I don't think they're, but okay, I am saying they're not. That like a Schmaltz or a Tuck or some of the free agents this year, they're not of Panarin caliber talent
Mhm.
wise. And to think that Tuck is and offer him like 12 and a half, like that's a mistake. You got to make sure the player is like good enough.
Right, right. But you also need to make sure that it's a fit, right? And that the fan, like the reason they're even in this situation, that they're doing this, and that they are taking the shorter term approach, and they are so focused on making the playoffs and everything, is to continue to grow the fan base.
That's
And
true.
if you bring in a player who has this settlement, who has had these allegations, who has had all of this stuff out there that makes the fan base very split on their ability to embrace him, that's something that you do have to consider. And again, that's where it feels like this is the first time they've acted the way that frankly most sports franchises act, where that was known and they went ahead and they pursued that player anyway, because the idea being presumably he's good enough that we win games, and when you're winning everything's forgiven. And it's one of those that it shouldn't work that way, but historically it has. Like that is something that sports has taught us, that if players win enough, somehow all of that stuff goes away. And again, it shouldn't go away, and it doesn't go away for a lot of people. But for a lot of people it does go away, and sometimes more people. And so it's the first time that the organization has shown us that like they believe that, the way all sports teams at the end of the day ultimately believe that, because nothing is better for business for a sports team than winning. Winning puts butts in seats, it gets eyes on television, and that's your sources of revenue. And this is the Kraken saying for the first time we're going to value that over the character concerns around a player like this.
Yeah, and I think that's significant, and it's worth
It
bringing up
is.
as a part of all of this. And I know you didn't like when I used the word desperate, but I think it speaks to
No,
that.
I think that is the appropriate place to use desperation. Yeah,
Okay,
I'm with you.
gotcha.
You won me over on that. I agree.
Okay,
Because that is what that move then signals, is that yeah, you're more desperate to win and gain fans that way than you are worried about alienating a significant portion of your fan base by acquiring a player like that and then rewarding them with the second largest cap hit, right? Like, it's not even like they were just trying to bring him in. They were going to make him the second highest paid player in the sport. That is something that has to be said, and that is something that the Kraken were willing to do with Artemi Panarin, despite everything that's known about him. And so I understand the fan reaction that we had around that, because that is a very uncomfortable thing, like that is, or a thought or an idea that this was on the table for them. I still don't know how to feel about it, right? Because again, it's awkward from our position, in the sense of I have my personal beliefs around that, which is I wouldn't want him there. But on the other side, again, you and I, we're also part of the business in a sense, where if the team is better, we do better. It genuinely, you know what I mean? Like, our numbers go up, and our ability to do this gets easier and better and more robust. And so I understand where they were operating from. I probably wouldn't do it, but I understand where they're operating from. And it does put us in that awkward position also, where again, we would have to cover it every day and basically act like it doesn't exist, because that's what the day-to-day situation around the team would be acting like it doesn't exist. And so I don't know. I'm just thankful that it's not the situation, because I think that also right now where the fan base is, it would have been so harmful, right? There's so many fans that would have been deeply hurt by that, understandably, justifiably. And I think that it would have been really damaging for them, given how much they've struggled to fill the building, how much they've struggled with the television numbers and everything. And you're just starting to grow out of that because the team is making this push to the playoffs. And I think bringing in somebody like Panarin would have potentially undone all of the good that you've been working on doing this year, lowering season ticket prices, offering more packages to get people into games, doing all of that stuff. One move like that, it erases all of the goodwill that you've been trying to build up. And so I do think that ultimately it's a good thing for the Kraken that they did not bring him in.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think it's a good thing they didn't. Good thing that he just wanted to go to LA. And so, I mean, really summing it up for me, for all the reasons that you stated, I think right approach, wrong player.
Yeah, I agree. I think
so it's the approach that they should keep. This was not the player to go after. And I understand you only have the market that's in front of you, and that, maybe you want to communicate something to the next guy, but you're also communicating some things, when you are offering this specific contract to the specific player.
Yeah.
That maybe you don't want to.
Yes. But we do know, as you stated earlier, and I do want to repeat this, the Kraken do listen to things. And so if you did have strong thoughts about this and you let it be known out there, they will hear it. I'm not promising anything beyond that, but they have heard it, right? And that is at least something, because there are some teams that we hear stories about, and they do not care at all about fan sentiment, and thankfully the Kraken do care about that. So that is a positive thing there. All right, two last quick questions before we go, RJ. Kraken just played in Southern California. They just played the Kings, won their last game before the Olympic break. Does Panarin joining the Kings worry you from a Kraken perspective, just in the sense that they added and they are one of the teams kind of in this big mess for, one of the Pacific Division playoff spots and the wild card?
Not at all. Not at all. As long as Jim Hiller is the coach in LA, I don't even think they're a playoff team. Like, any Kraken fan who watched that Kraken Kings game, and I know Panarin didn't play in that game. I know he's waiting until after the Olympic break. They're just such sad, uninspired hockey. And they lost the game in the first period. They go out in Vegas the next day. They lose that game in the first period, like down 4-0. No, the Kings, as long as Jim Hiller is the coach, they don't concern me at all. I don't even think they're a playoff team, even with Panarin this year. They have the path to fix that. If they make a coaching change in the offseason, they can add some things. But this year, they don't scare me at all.
Yeah, I agree.
You disagree? Because I know you pushed back on that earlier.
Look, I think, does he make the Kings better? Yes, he does. Like, he is a good player.
Well, yeah, of course.
He spreads out the scoring on their team, and he makes them better. And if he is enough to bring some inspiration back to that locker room, just the idea that they did land the biggest player that was available all year, I think that they can make a run for the playoffs. Does that run necessarily come at the expense of the Kraken? No, I'd be more worried if I was the Ducks personally, or certainly the Sharks. But I do think that he makes them. I was with you in before where they did not seem like a playoff team to me. Now I see a path and an avenue for them to make the playoffs. So in that sense, it worries me a little bit. But yes, to your point of like them going to Vegas the next day after that Kraken game and looking terrible, that's a huge red flag. And thankfully, it's a red flag the Kraken don't have to worry about because they had the game in Anaheim the night before the game in LA, and they looked pretty bad in that Anaheim game, RJ, but they were able to respond well the next night in Los Angeles. And I think that that's a positive thing for the Kraken that we can look to and say, look, this team does seem to be on the right path, have the right attitude, the right approach to actually being able to make the playoffs this year. And they were able to add more points and kind of start to distance themselves a little bit from the non-playoff spots there. And so I think that that's a positive one. The one thing they just got to figure out, although I don't think they have to worry about it anymore this year, is just you had 4 games against the Ducks this year and you looked bad in all of them. You got a 2-2 split out of it, so that's positive. But they just, for whatever reason, cannot play that Anaheim Ducks team without looking pretty rough.
Yeah, they match up pretty poorly against them, I think. But again, it's not even something they have to figure out because they don't face them again. And you look at
And
the
a
4
playoff
games.
situation matchup is highly unlikely too, based on where these teams would have to be seated.
Yeah, it'd have to be a 2-3 seed. I don't see Edmonton falling off that. It's unlikely. So no, I'm not really worried about it in the short term because you don't have to face them again. And also, again, you look at the season series, they got a 2-2 split. I mean, that is this Kraken team in a nutshell. You can play really bad for 4 games and still get 2 wins and 2 losses. Like that's the whole story of the early season Kraken team anyway. Like it's not a concern for them. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, or on the Ducks side, you can play really well and you still get 2 losses and only 2 wins out of it, which I think has been also a story for that team this year. Their inability, even in the game again, this last one against Anaheim, Kraken able to come back in the 3rd period and make it close after getting pretty much owned for the first 55 minutes. Like, yeah, that is a
rough
problem
for the Ducks. I mean, they're the one team in the Pacific with more actual wins than losses. And they're just hanging on to the final wild card spot because of the stupid point system. Yeah, tough luck for them.
And because they can't close out games, so they do have some issues too. All right, that's going to do it for this episode of the Deep Dive. Want to remind everybody that next week we are off. Just enjoy the Olympics and all of that kind of stuff, and then we'll be back the following Monday. After that, I don't have a calendar in front of me, but let's see if I could do rough math. So we're off on the 16th, and then we'd be back on the 23rd.
Yes, you got it. Good job.
Yeah, basic addition. Let's go. Thankfully, it matches up with football scoring.
I was going to say, just add 7.
Add by 7 because of
we've
football.
been trained since very young kids to add 7 to things. Yeah.
Yep. See, today it was 3 field goals because it's the 9th. And you had the 2 touchdowns plus the extra points.
Seahawks start. There you go.
And you get there. Exactly. So that's how we get there. That's how we do things. Yes. One more congratulations to the Seahawks and one more big thank you to the offices of Rico Tessendor for sponsoring the pod as he does each and every week. And while we hope none of you ever need his services, the odds say that at some point someone out there will be involved in an accident, whether on the road, at work, or anywhere in between. And when you are, we hope you call Rico at 425-778-9800 or visit his website, ricotessendor.com, to schedule a free consultation. He's won millions of dollars for his clients and helped thousands of people in the greater Seattle area. And as a fellow member of the ECH community, we know he'll help you too. Thanks so much for listening, everybody, and we will see you all next time.
Hey everyone, before we go, we just wanted to give a quick shout out to all of our awesome patrons over at patreon.com/Emerald City Hockey, especially our Terror of the Deep patrons.
Thank you so much for making all this possible. We really appreciate your support.